we're learning how to regulate our emotions. At first, we have to learn how to actually identify those emotions. So we're going to learn what those emotions are, and then we're going to put tools into practice to be able to regulate those emotions. Do something with them, something healthy. So why do we learn these skills? We want to be able to quiet our body. We want to be able to take those high emotions and that stress, and we want to be able to limit it and bring it down. We want to be able to quiet our behavior. Intense emotions lead to intense choices, and oftentimes those choices are damaging. Those choices are things that we regret. We want to be able to quiet the mind and body so that we can find that wise mind easier. We can find that the regulation between that irrational, emotional mind and that rational mind, and we can find that wise mind much easier. We want to be more effective in our relationships and meeting goals and doing different things. If we're continually living off of these emotional highs or these intense emotions, we're not getting anything done. We're not getting anything productive done. Generally, we're just wearing ourselves out. Then we want to be able to have better, when we're able to learn all this and model it and put it all together, our self-esteem comes up. We have better respect for ourselves. People see us differently. We're actually improving our overall well-being because we're learning how to make choices that solve situations, not make choices that might create more frustration or more anger. When we talk about emotions, there's a couple of things that we need to kind of get straight first. There's a lot of times that kids come in with different preconceived notions or ideas about emotions. And the first one that we have to learn is that emotions are neither good or bad. Emotions are what they are. They are just these feelings. They do exist. We are never going to get away from having feelings. That's always going to happen. What we worry about is the behavior because of those emotions, and that's generally what gets us in trouble. So the first piece that we're doing is we're recognizing that emotions are not bad, that just because you're angry right now does not mean that that's bad. It's what you do with that anger that gets you in trouble. So we're recognizing that emotions are. We want to recognize that emotions don't last forever. We might think that. We might think that we are, when we're really upset about a situation or really sad about a situation, it seems like we're never going to get through it. But being able to take a step back and remembering that, okay, emotions don't last forever. This will pass. Something will happen and will take this emotion's place. Sometimes that helps us being able to use those wise mind skills and get through that situation. Just because you have strong emotions doesn't mean that you have to react on it. Again, just because you have the emotion does not mean that there has to be an action with it. We just feel the emotion, we recognize it, and we let it go. Emotions are not facts. Different people will have different emotional responses to the same situations. It doesn't mean that any one of those people are wrong because they're feeling something different. Emotions are very powerful, and sometimes we feel like they are the truth. They are the only way to be. But just remember, emotions are just that, they're feelings. And we cannot get rid of emotions. That's we're not going to be able to live our life and not have feelings. We're going to have those. So being able to accept those feelings, to recognize the emotions when they come up, and to make good choices after it is what part of emotion regulation is all about. When we talk about emotions, there's primary emotions and secondary emotions. I see a lot of times with kids in treatment that when we talk about primary emotions, that we're talking about happy, sad, mad, glad. They kind of have that very basic understanding of I'm either happy or sad, I'm either upset and angry, or I'm okay. And so there's really, and they kind of always go from one of those extremes, that if they're happy, they're really not any of the other things. They might be, but they might not be able to recognize it. So then what we start talking about, once we can identify those primary emotions, then we're going to look at the things that cause those emotions. There are secondary emotions. We might be angry, maybe because we feel shame about something, maybe because we're embarrassed about something, and we respond with that anger. Those primary emotions tend to be easy emotions to access and easy emotions to identify. But we're going to learn how to be able to identify the pieces of those emotions. There's really 3 jobs that emotions have. They communicate with us. Emotions communicate with others. We often have emotions, and we often show those emotions in different ways. Facial expressions or body language. Nonverbal communication is huge in communicating emotions. Emotions motivate us. The emotion fear will tell us to do something. It gives us a, hey, you need to do something right now. Or maybe stay focused. It has us becoming alert and recognizing what's going on around us. Emotions save us time in certain situations. This is where we're learning how, using these skills, we're learning when we recognize a situation that we're in, instead of falling into, we all have patterns that we fall into, we might need to tweak those patterns a little bit so that we're doing something productive, not something counterproductive or dangerous. And so those, recognizing that we have emotions, and when they come up, we're able to take a better understanding of the situation, and it saves us time. We don't always have to sit and think, okay, what am I doing here? Why am I feeling this way? We're able to recognize, okay, this is familiar. I've done this before. The last piece of kind of what emotions do is validate. They validate how we feel. If you've ever had kind of that gut instinct feeling and had that, oh, I feel that something is going on right now, and that's what your emotions are. You have to be careful not to carry that piece to the extreme. That when you feel a certain way, remember, emotions aren't facts. So it's not just because I feel this way, it's right. It's urging you to do something in a situation. Generally, emotions come up and we take action. And it's the type of action that we take that we're learning to make sure that it's positive and not negative. At this point, what I would do with your students is I would take out an emotion list or my emotion blocks, and we would learn how to describe and how to recognize different emotions. And so I might have the students pull a block with an emotion on it, and maybe they have to act it out, or maybe they'll have to think about a time when they felt that way. Some of those emotions they might not recognize. And so it's learning, it's describing that emotion, and then learning how to look back and say, okay, I can see a time where maybe where I felt that way. Emotions are on a continuum. They're not all strong. They're not all good. They're not all bad. They're not all, there's a range of them. There's an event that happens that triggers a thought that then triggers a feeling. Sometimes that happens, well, not sometimes, all the times, that happens very, very quickly. Those things sometimes are so quickly that we don't even recognize that it's 3 different steps, that there's an event, there's a thought, and then there's an emotion. So being able to say, okay, and recognizing, this is where we're learning how to practice these skills. So we're going to take a step back in a situation that's probably already happened. We're going to look at it and we're going to say, okay, what was the situation that happened? What did I think about that situation? And then what were my emotions about that situation? And we break it down. When you're able to break it down afterwards, it teaches us that we can break it down when we're in the moment as well. Once we have that emotion, it's going to prompt an action. And that action is either a good action or a bad action. It's either positive or negative. And that's either going to have a positive outcome or a negative outcome. And usually that outcome becomes a prompting event, becomes a situation that, again, we have a thought about, that we have an emotion of, that causes an action. And you can see in that process how it can be a spiral, how it can just be a spiral effect, because the outcomes become another event that we have a thought about, that we get a feeling of, that we then have an action on. And so we want to make sure that we are following that and that we're changing the spiral and we're not going downhill, but we're making positive choices. We are changing the thought process on something to invoke a different emotion, or when we have an emotion that we have, recognizing, okay, this is my emotion, but just because I'm angry doesn't mean I have to hit somebody. It might mean that I can take a step back and talk to them about something, or take a step out and take myself out of the situation for a minute. Then what that's doing is we're making a different choice. We're not changing the emotion, we're recognizing what that emotion is, but we're changing the outcome of that, which will then change that prompting event in the beginning. One of the things that you're going to find in DBT is lots of acronyms. They use lots of kind of catchphrases to be able to prompt what you know that you need to do. One of those under emotion regulation is please master. All of these things that we're talking about here helps us to describe those emotions, to recognize the emotions that we're feeling, and it gives us the capacity to be able to deal with the emotions, to make a different choice, understanding, feeling, recognizing, okay, I feel this emotion. Instead of just kind of doing what we've always done, we want to be able to recognize, oh, I can do something different. And so this is one of the ways, this please master is one of the ways that we're learning how to do that. So the P in please master is we want to make sure that we're taking care of our body. We're wanting to make sure that we're taking care of our physical illnesses or our physical self. The L in please stands for listing our resources. What resources do we have? The L in please is listing resources. Maybe it's recognizing that you do have a doctor, that you do have a primary care. If you don't have a primary care doctor, what resources do you have to make sure that you can go out and make sure that your body is okay? That if you are sick, what resources do you have there? The E is eating. We want to make sure that we're eating healthy or eating right. If we recognize that sugar is not good for us and maybe causes some things to happen in our bodies, then maybe we need to cut out some sugar, but we want to make sure that we are eating properly. The A in please is altering drugs. We want to make sure that we are avoiding mind-altering drugs. We want to make sure that we're sleeping enough. That's the S in sleep. The last E in please is making sure that we're exercising, that we're taking care of our body. And the master of that is just making sure that we're doing all of that, that we're doing all of that to the best of our ability. One of the things that when kids come into ERA, we first ask them about sleep, and we want to make sure that they're sleeping well, because if they're not sleeping well, all of the other things that we're asking them to do, they might not be able to do as effectively because their bodies are tired, their minds are tired. So we want to make sure that they're getting enough sleep. So that piece of the emotion regulation is kind of how we get to changing what that action is. When we have that thought, or we have a situation, we have that thought, then we have that emotion, instead of doing what we would always do, and maybe that's something negative, we're in a space, in a place where we're strong enough to say, okay, I can recognize that that's just an emotion. That doesn't mean that I have to have behavior like I've always had. I can do something different in this. We want to make sure that we are building positive experiences. We want to do things that make us happy. We want to make sure that we are doing things that we enjoy. That's huge. That's important. you're not going to have any fun. You're kind of going to get bored of everything if you're always doing something that you don't want to do. So making sure that you're building positive experiences. Those positive experiences will actually help long term because you're learning how to balance play and you're learning how to balance work. Okay, I know that I can have fun and I can do my job as well. So again, it's not that either or. I either can have fun or I can work. I can do both. I can have both. We want to be able to recognize positive emotions, not just the negative ones. Most of the time we talk about the negative emotions because they create the negative outcomes and the negative consequences, but we also want to be able to recognize those positive emotions and those experiences that bring us joy, or those experiences that we enjoy. We want to be able to know how to go back to those and how to recreate those. Just like when we get in that negative spiral of having a situation, a thought and emotion, and we kind of do something that's harmful and it starts all over again, we want to be able to recognize that the same thing can happen with positive experiences. That you can have a situation, a thought, and a positive emotion, and it can cause something that you can do that's positive that then creates another cycle. And we want to make sure that we are not focusing on what we're in right now, that we're not believing that it's going to last forever. Remember, emotions are temporary. It's not an all the time thing. It's something that we're going to feel and then we're going to let it go. And so understanding that we don't have to hold on to it. We want to, when we talk about changing when we have a situation, we have our thought and then we have our emotion and then our action. When breaking that piece down is difficult. So the way that we talk to kids and teach that is basically opposite emotion. We want to be able to say, okay, what have you done in the past in a situation where you had this emotion? And maybe it's anger. And I use anger a lot because it tends to be a primary emotion and it tends to be something that we all recognize and understand. So if I'm angry, maybe I hit the wall. Maybe when I get angry, I hit the wall. And so that's kind of linked. That's what we've always done. So now, learning opposite emotion, we're going to go in and we're going to say, okay, when I'm angry and this is what I normally do, what's the opposite of that? What can I do that's the opposite of that? And bring in and say, okay, I'm going to do something different there. And we take a step back. Now again, when we teach this to students, we teach this in past experiences. So we have them write down a situation that happened, what the situation was, what their thought was, what their belief, what their emotion was, and then what they did. And then we have them go back and say, okay, what could you have done differently? Then when they're in the middle of that situation, when they can go back and recognize it enough in the past, when they're in the situation, they can say, oh, this is what I would normally do, but let me do this opposite emotion and let me do something different. Emotion regulation is basically being able to identify emotions. It's keeping your body and yourself, your physical self, strong enough so that you can make healthy decisions. And it's being able to recognize that there's not just negative things, that there's positive emotions as well, and there's positive actions. And then understanding that just because you have a feeling doesn't mean that there has to be a certain action. You can do something different. You can do something sometimes that's completely opposite than that. And it's learning how to recognize that and put that into place.